So Willard, we're going to try and fast forward through your life, through your incredible life, and then bring us to a discussion of what are the important things that we as a city and we as citizens need looking forward. But to go way back, you grew up on a dairy farm. You were also raised as a Mennonite, and you were married to your beloved Ruth in the Blenheim Mennonite Church, 1942. You've suggested that the values that you had as a young person, and certainly growing up in the Mennonite Church, may have transferred to your business ethos. Can you please talk to us about how your Mennonite background influenced you as an entrepreneur, or as the entrepreneur that you were going to become, or just possibly explain to us more about being a Mennonite?
Well, there were many different kinds of Mennonites, so the word Mennonite is grossly misunderstood. I think in the city of Winnipeg, there's 49 different Mennonite churches of different branches. So our Mennonite church was a modern Mennonite church, quite similar to Presbyterian or United. And we had certain practices that probably were more adhered to. In other words, one was there was a verse in the Bible where every person, it was a sin not to pay your debts. And this translated into giving the Mennonites greater credit but the banks. Because they knew they would pay. Now there would be Mennonites that couldn't pay. Some disaster happened. But their family or their other brethren in the church would come forward and pay the debts.
Really?
And so this was one thing that you could get credit to get going into a business where some people could not. But there were many other factors as well. I lived in a country area that was about half Presbyterian, half Mennonite.
Oh, wow.
And they seemed to try to outdo themselves in helping their neighbor.
That's not a bad thing.
If somebody broke a leg like I did, everybody would rush there to do their chores, milk their cows, and what have you. And the two groups would try to outdo one another. And especially at Sallow and threshing times, where the women provide dinners, there was a great competition who could provide the best dinner.
So everybody wins in those.
That's right.
Now fast forward, you got married and you went to serve as a firefighter in the war. When you came, you diligently saved your money because you had a goal. You wanted to buy a dairy, is that correct?
Yes, my father had a dairy, one-horse dairy, and also he had 3 brothers, and they each had a milk route in the town of Preston. We lived in Blair. My dad sold this when I was about 1.5 years old. But when these brothers would get together, they all sold their milk routes except one. One bought a farm close to the town of Preston and carried on. In fact, I worked for him for a period of time. But when these brothers would get together, instead of talking about their farms and their animals and so on, they would go back to the dairy days when they were milkmen. And this started when they had specially constructed a huge can, I think a 30-gallon can, and they had constructed a wooden tilt apparatus that they could tilt it forward. And then they had a gallon can and a quart measure. And the woman would come to the door with her container. And this was the way milk was delivered then. And of course they would get together and they would tell stories of what happened in the milk days. In other words, my father, again a devout Mennonite, he goes to the door, knocks on the door, and the woman comes out and she's got nothing on but an open kimono. I guess it was really open. I guess she had figured it was her husband who had gone to the outhouse. And here was my dad with milk. So they would tell stories like this, and then they would laugh, and they would laugh, and they would laugh till their stomachs literally rolled out. And so this made me decide at an early age, look, farming is too tough. In those days, you pitched your hay by hand, you shoveled your manure by hand, everything was done, you milked your cows by hand.
Yeah.
And so my dream was to own a dairy.
It was to own a dairy. And you made that dream come true by coming back from the war, and you were now married, you'd saved some money. You bought, I believe, 3 dairies at first.
No, just one dairy, one broken down truck dairy.
One?
But from all the stories my father and his brothers told me, I mean, you knocked on doors and you told them your milk was better. You had a better cream line.
Really?
And you would get new customers. So.
Wow. Wow, so it was a personal sell.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, very much. So, but you did move to Barrie. You and Ruth in 1947,
Yeah.
you purchased Lakeview Dairy, and you and Ruth moved here. Was it just the dairy that brought you to Barrie, or was there anything else in 1947 that made you want to come?
Yeah, I guess what happened was the dairy in Guelph was in a building far too small for the size we had grown it to. And I had an opportunity to sell it for a good profit.
Yeah.
And this dairy in Barrie was for sale. And from inquiries I had made, and just on one visit to Barrie, and looked at the beautiful Kilimanjaro Bay, it sold me in Barrie.
Yeah, yeah.
The dairy, by the way, was located right on the water.
That's pretty perfect. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When you were running the dairy, you were often asked for handouts. This was the late 40s after the war and into the 50s. Your policy was that no one went away hungry, but you would give them some work to do. And with the idea that with that came self-respect. So regarding your policy about giving handouts to people in need, do you have any suggestions for ideas of programs that could give unemployed people now a hand up when they want, in a way that they could help the community in some way?
Well, I think there's a great deal of opportunity there. I think just getting a straight handout, if you have a disability, any other reasons, or you just don't want to work, or you have an addiction, it's too easy. And this way, I would have some work for them to do. Maybe break the yard, maybe do some painting, maybe do something like that. Mm-hmm. And pay them for it so they had a little respect. Mm-hmm. And instead of just giving them a direct handout. At that time, our dairy was located close to downtown, right along the railway tracks, so we had quite a bit of this happening. Mm-hmm. And this was just a policy we used. Mm-hmm. It could probably be used to a greater extent in many ways, that people be given some type of task, and I think they would feel a whole lot better for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're right. So you didn't like the way Barrie was being run, so you decided to become the mayor. And you, as the mayor, as the first mayor of the city of Barrie, you continually challenged the status quo right from the beginning. You were always looking for improvements.
Well, it wasn't quite like that. But when I came to Barrie, I soon got involved, and I was in the Chamber of Commerce. And I was put on the industrial committee. And I was a bit of a salesman. Mm-hmm. Selling milk, you learn how to sell. And I was not happy with the council of Barrie, or the city, we needed new industry. We needed employment for our youth. We had a few old outstanding industries, a shoe factory, some tanneries, but we needed more if we were going to grow and become prosperous and to have employment for our youth as they grew up and went through their educational system. So this was my reason for running for council, and I had it on my first platform when I was elected an alderman. And later on, we were part of the county. I was deputy reeve. And again, I was not happy with the way Barrie was treated in the county. I didn't think thought we were paying far too much for what we were getting. And I learned little things, like we lived above the dairy. So I walked to the county buildings, which were just up Point Street. So I didn't get mileage. I got a per diem. I forget what it was. I think it was $9, something like that. And but you had to live more than 10 miles to get a mileage rate. At any rate, my first session there, everybody was running for a committee. I couldn't understand this. Why would you want to be on so many committees? And I soon found out they would have committee days, and if they had 5 committee meetings in a day, they got 5 per diems a day. Plus, the mileage, they got 5 mileages. And plus that, if they lived up in Tiny Township or Honey Harbor or places like that, usually they'd come down 4 or 5 in a car and they'd each get their mileage. So there were just some practices like that I wasn't in agreement with. And so I campaigned on that we withdraw as part of the county and become a city on our own. We run our own show.
And you did, yeah. It seems that when I look at all the things you've done, every time you didn't like something, which was fairly often, you would just go about changing it. And one of the things that's most famous, I think everybody probably experienced tonight coming here, because it's right outside the door, which is the 5 Points intersection, which at one point I understand was called Kinzie's Run. Is that correct?
Well, what happened there was, this was before 400 was completed. So all of the traffic went through the 5 Points. And what a nightmare that was, especially at rush hour. And Ruth and I holidayed in Sarasota, Florida, and they had a similar place before I-75 was built. And they installed this stop and go system where every light went red and all the people walked in every direction. And so we were the first in Canada to do this. I believe there was, the first was actually in Boston, Massachusetts. But we were the first in Canada to do this. And when I proposed this was before I was mayor. I was chairman of the traffic committee. And I don't think council knew what they were voting on. I tried to explain it, but it was such a mess that they voted for it. So we put it in, and quite frankly, at first, there were 2 problems. One, we didn't have the timing quite right. I think the timing was I walked the longest way across. And we set the time on that, and I was a pretty fast walker. That didn't suit people with a cane like I have tonight. So we had to alter the timing, and plus we had to run a campaign of when the lights turned red and it said, "Walk, you walked." And I can remember Ken Walls, who was owner and an editor-in-chief of the Barrie Examiner, he wrote this story that it's Kinzie's Run,
Kinzie's Run?
instead of Walk.
Run, don't walk.
However, they've tried to change it since. Many times they've had motions to change that, and they've never ever changed it.
No.
And that's what, 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah, and it still works. Yeah, so that's amazing. It was just one of many things that you did that were the first to happen in Barrie. Barrie was the first city in Canada, I believe, to be completely fluorescently lit.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And also, Barrie had the lowest tax rate. It had the lowest debt per capita. There was no sewage rate when you were the mayor. And now, looking back 50 years with 2020 hindsight, is there any one of these accomplishments that you are particularly proud of? I would be proud of certainly of the 5 points because it's still going. Is there anything else you're particularly proud of?
These points here give us great selling points. Give me great selling points to go out across, particularly the United States, and this was before free trade.
Yes.
And to sell industry to come to Barrie. And I would, as a mayor, you had a lot of, I don't know what word to use, but it give you an entrance to company presidents. If you walked into a company office and you presented a mayor's card in the United States and asked to see the company president, I never had to wait more than 20 minutes before I seen the company president. And I would present him with these facts. And Ontario has a municipal book called the Blue Book, and it would list all the cities and all the facts. And just to back up my statements, if they were correct, I would then give them a copy of the Blue Book without a page outline. And this brought us many, many industries that came here as a result of that. It was just a great selling point. And
now, I think one of those interesting meetings happened, I believe you told me, at a mayor's convention in Chicago, and Mayor Daley sought you out because of your name, Kinzie, but also he gave you a tour of the city that ended up having a big effect on our city. Can you tell us a little bit about meeting Mayor Daley of Chicago?
Yes, Richard Daley was mayor, and we had a mayor's convention there. And Chicago was founded by Jonathan Kinzie, which, if I have a moment, I could explain that name. It wasn't really Jonathan Kinzie, but that's the name he used. At any rate, he sought me out, and we got acquainted, and I told him our location. In fact, I gave him one of our brochures that we had. And I told him about our own waterfront, how that we were attempting to clear it out, which was full of bulrushes and small shrubs and sewage. And he said how their waterfront was the same way, and how they cleared it out, and how it was a great place for all of the Chicago people to enjoy themselves, and very attractive over what it had been. And so this gave me the idea with renewed vigor to come back here. And I had made the first motion to clear out the whole head end of the bay. And it was very controversial.
It wasn't?
There were small trees and whatnot growing in the waterfront, some with water up there. And of course, we didn't have the Lakeshore Drive. We didn't even have Ann Street at that time. We just had Bradford Street. But it was controversial into that we were tampering with nature. And the railway went through. We had some industry along there that owned properties. In fact, the property was all owned. And so it was a massive project for a small town or a city to take on and to clear this. But we I ran an election campaign on it and had an artist drawing of what it could look like, and it's very much like it looks like today.
Really?
Yes. And I went into Ross Stevens' store for men, which was on Dunlop Street, and I bought a new suit. And so I said during the election campaign, I'd like this drawing put in your window, and he had to agree. At any rate, I got elected, so we went to it with full power.
Yeah.
And some of the opposition was the opponents, you know, that we were interfering with the environment. Mm-hmm. And they brought in organizations like Ducks Unlimited that said, if you go through with this plan of Kinzie's, you'll never see another duck or goose in Kilimanjaro. Well, they were wrong.
They were wrong on that. That's amazing when you think of how wonderful our waterfront is now. That's
and it can be much further enhanced.
Mm-hmm. What would you do? What else would you do?
Well, there's many things that can be done, and it can be further extended because Barrie's going to extend much further along the waterfront. So I hope they keep available sites for swimming, for parks, and they have done some of that. And our present area, that it's more utilized, and I'm personally advocating a heritage trail that would tell the story of Barrie from the Ice Ages right up to the present day, of many instances of the black people coming from the Underground Railway saga, making their way around Kempenfelt Bay to go to Shanty Bay, of the first steamship, of the settlement of Kempenfelt Village. There's vast amounts of history that you can find, but it's not easily portrayed. And if it were portrayed in a trail of this type of thing, where you can walk it and look at it, and today you can have stations where are wheelchair accessible. You can have books on those stations with pages on. You can put it on your telephone or anything that tells the story of a particular event. If you do this yourself, this will stay in your mind. And if you have our youth and the people of Barrie know their history, know the heritage, it makes them a proud people, and it's better for the whole community. And just remember, most of the people in Barrie today are newcomers. They don't know the history of Barrie, and this would give them a tremendous opportunity. And there'd be no better site anywhere than around Kempenfelt Bay.
On the south part of the bay. Now, work started on the Heritage Trail, I think, last summer, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where is it? Where is it right?
Well,
where is it at right now?
It's actually just in the planning stage, and it seems to take a long, long time. I told council in the inaugural address, back when I was in council, we had one-year terms. And boy, if you wanted to do something, you had to do it quick. Now they've got 4 years, and they take 4 years planning and another 4 years to start doing something. So this is part of the problem.
Yeah. Now, you started, though, the Barrie Community Foundation, which was...
Well, I didn't start it.
Oh, you didn't start it?
Okay.
Okay, you were just part of that?
Yeah.
But it's a not-for-profit charitable organization led by a volunteer board.
Yeah.
And the purpose of it is to accept donations into existing endowments and establish new endowments. Is that that's
where they
correct?
get tax receipts.
Yeah, that will serve the public.
Yeah.
So you were a founding member of the Barrie Community Foundation?
I was a member from the beginning, or close to the beginning.
Okay, can you tell us any more about that, or how the Barrie Community Foundation chooses its beneficiaries?
Well, it features many different aspects of, normally a foundation, you put money in and you use the interest from that money to support projects. But in this case, we've got an exception to that. And in the case of the trail, for instance, we have it as a flow-through type of thing, where you can make a donation and it can be spent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we started looking at your life in the dairy, and now we've fast-forwarded to the Heritage Trail, but we missed a big chunk in the middle. So if we could just go back a little bit. You have a great story. Willard, I know that there are people in this audience who have climbed mountains, gone down into canyons. Willard, can you look out, if you have been on a trip with Willard, would you kindly raise your hand and just sort of wave now so Willard
It's
can...
darkness, but I can't.
There,
thank you. Thank you.
Look at that. So thank you so much. So some of these people I hope will be probably asking you questions in a little bit. Willard has done over 500 trips, 5 continents, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro twice, once on his 79th birthday as the oldest person to climb Kilimanjaro. And just as an aside on that, my very athletic 35-year-old son climbed Kilimanjaro in December, and he said it was shatteringly difficult, the hardest thing he'd ever done. And Willard didn't really say it was that hard at all. You've led groups across the Chilkoot Pass, you've gone down into the Grand Canyon, but you have a great story that at age 40, you were not that big. You were athletic, but you weren't that big on walking. Could you tell the audience about what turned it around for you starting to be a walker and then a hiker?
Well, I guess it started maybe with politics, I don't know. But you attended a lot of meetings, a lot of dinners. And I always had back problems. And the back problems got much more severe. My doctor was Dr. Ross Turnbull. And he said I had
rheumatism?
Rheumatism, yeah.
Rheumatism.
And he sent me to the hospital, and the old hospital had one x-ray technician, Willard Gregg, who was a friend of mine, and he took x-rays of my back, and he told me I didn't have rheumatism. So there was a quandary. So anyway, as a result of that, I got sent to an expert in Toronto on back problems. And I get to his office, and the nurse said, the doctor has seen your x-rays, he wants to see you undressed. So I get undressed, and I'm standing in the middle of his office. He starts walking around me, and he says, aha, just as I thought. Just as I thought. Just as I thought. Well, that was enough thoughts. So I said, thought what? And he summed it up. He said, as a young boy, you did hard physical work. And I said, yes, I worked hard. And he said, now you're sitting behind a desk and eating too much, you put on weight. And he said, there's nothing I can do to help you. And he let that sink in. Then he held up his 3 fingers and he said, here's your spine, and here's on either side, there's sinews, there's ligaments, what have you. And he said, they're just lazy, they're not doing your job. And he said, all your weight's on your spine. And he said, well, I can't help you. He said, you can help yourself. He said, by losing your excess weight and by exercising. And he said the best thing to do is to walk. So I needed my car in the daytime, but we had a restaurant, and at night I'd go back to check on things. And so I started walking. The first time, I still remember very clearly, I'll walk. And I walked from my house from Sandy Bay Road to where the Lakeview Dairy was on Dunlop Street, and it just about killed me. Yeah. But I kept at it, and finally I turned from walking to running, where I run at the Y 9 miles a day.
Yeah. I think that's such an inspiring
And then
story.
hiking followed
Yeah.
that, because I had an acquaintance of mine that was a member of the Bruce Trail. He said to me, Willard, if you like walking and running, you'll like hiking much more. And he took me on a Bruce Trail trip, and I liked it.
And you were kind of hooked
met
from there?
people, and I was hooked.
So on all those hikes, and I know they've been hugely influential and are a real gift to our community, because many people have continued hiking and exploring the world because of the introduction they got from you. On any of those trips, were there ones where you thought you might not be able to finish the hike?
Well, frequently there were problems with people. People problems. And we never had any deaths. We did have some broken bones. But there's one particular story I could tell because it kind of applies to Barrie.
Yes, I'd love you. Is that about Isabel?
Well,
We'd love you to tell that story.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Actually, she told me I could use her real name, which was Paula.
Oh.
I told you, Isabel.
I was trying to protect her.
This was on the Appalachian Trail. And normally on a hike like this, we would start out on a 6 or 7 day hike with everything on our back, and we would go from one point to another. And this one year we were down in North Carolina, and we had hiked south from Franklin, North Carolina, a small town in North Carolina. And this year we were going north. And so we'd head for at this one place where we'd all meet, and then we'd start out the following morning with our packs, our food, equipped for the 6 or 7 days or 8 days, whatever the length of the hike was. Well, we got into the second day, and we had crossed a little road. It looked like a car maybe went over it about once a week. But we had crossed this road, and the day before, by the way, I must tell you this, the day before when we got to our campsite, which was a 3-sided shelter where we would stay or tent, why, there was no water. So we had to hike an extra 4 miles. So it was a long day previous. But this day we crossed this road, and when we do these hikes, everyone participates. Each day there's a new crew formed. 4 or 6 members of the party will be crew. They'll cook dinner, breakfast, and so on. And there will be 2 volunteers, 2 usually strong people that we call the backup. And they would be the backup, and I would lead. Because at that time there were no GPS. We went by map and compass. And sometimes the trails could be a little misleading. So we got to a rest stop in the morning going up a mountain. We had crossed this road, and we're going up this mountain, and Henderson Mountain. And we get up the mountain maybe a mile and a half. And there we have a rest stop, and there we wait for the backup to come up to see that everybody's gotten there safely. Well, the backup was not coming. We waited and waited, and it was rather not too pleasant a day. And obviously something was wrong. Finally, one of the backup people arrived, and he said, "It's Paula. It's her leg, and she can't hardly walk on it." And so I appointed a new leader. I always have an assistant. my friend who was here, Karen Hunter, a long-time assistant, and a very good one. Anyway, I appointed a new leader, and I go back with, no, I went back on my own. I dropped my pack where I was, and I went back. I just took out my first aid kit, that was all. And I go back where the other party of the backup, it's always a team of two. He was there with Paula. And well, her leg was not good. She had trouble standing on it. And so I got out tensor bandages and wrapped it from top to bottom. And the plan was that we might get her back to that road. And lo and behold, maybe somebody, maybe a car might come along. These were all doubts. Mm-hmm. And we had problems getting her because the trail was narrow and rocky, and where it was wide enough, one could be on either side of her and support her. But in many instances, somebody just had to go behind her or in front of her and get her through the trail. So we're going down the trail, and she's very tired, and with this leg. And we give her a little rest stop, and here in the distance this hound dog appears, and it's frightened. It stays this distance, maybe from here to the chairs, but we've had experiences before with lost dogs, and this was obviously a lost hunting dog. And as we seen it closer, its ears were chewed up, and its paws were all bloody. It had been lost a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And we gave it a little food. And of course, the minute we did that, the hound dog was ours. He wouldn't leave the side of my leg. So we get down within about 200 yards of this road, and here I hear it. My father had a Model A Ford, and I hear this Model A Ford chugging up this mountain road. And I just drop everything and rush down. And I made it in time. I hold out my hand, the car stops. There's an older man and an older lady. Remember, we're in hillbilly country there. And I tell them what's going on, and oh yes, they'd help us. And our final destination was Fontana Dam. And he said, well, we'll take her there. And I said, well, I'll pay you. No, you can take anything. In the meantime, Paula, we get her down, and we get her in the car, and I said, Paula, how much money do you have? You're going to take you to Fontana Dam, and you're going to have to live on something till we get there. And she said, well, I got $10. And no, she didn't want any more, but I remember tucking two $20 bills into her shirt pocket. So anyway, that was it. They took care of her. But that's just part of the story. 3 or 3.5 days later, when we get to Fontana Dam, why, there is Paula. And then she tells us her story. And when she got to Fontana Dam, by the way, Fontana Dam is the square dance headquarters of North America. So I knew there'd be people there. And there's hundreds of cabins and houses that people can stay in for their square dances. But they rent them out to people coming to the square dances, because these were built for the workers when the dam was built. They made a movie on this, by the way. At any rate, when she got there, with all the people there, there was not a doctor. And they unwrapped tensor bandages at her knees and just puffed out like this. So it was serious. But there was again a couple there, and they said, well, we'll take you to Franklin, 80 torturous mountain miles away. We'll take you there. There's a hospital there. So they take her to the hospital, along with the hound dog. And so she got there. So the doctor treated her, did everything that had to be done. He drained excess fluid from her leg. In the meantime, the nurses, they treated the hound dog. They wrapped all of its legs, put ointment on its ears that had been in a fight, and looked after the hound dog real good. She paid the bill, which came to $50. She had 80 cents left. So she said to them, she said, where is it? Where can I take the hound dog? Well, Franklin had a combined police, fire, public works, everything in one building the way Barrie used to have. And she takes the hound dog there and to the police department. It had a tag on. They called the owner. He said, I'll be there. I'm starting driving right now. I'll be there sometime the following day. It's a long ways away. And then she said to the policeman, she said, is there a place where I can get a glass of milk? She had 80 cents left. And he said, you mean you haven't had dinner? And she said, no. And he said, well, how be I take you out to dinner? So he did. So in the meantime, after dinner, she said, is there a place where I can set up my tent? And he said, you mean you have no place to stay? And she said, well, I have a tent. And he said, well, let's check the fire department, see if they have an empty bunk there. Sometimes there's a fireman that's not on duty. So sure enough, there was one empty bunk. So then the fireman checks on her the next morning, and he said, now, how are you going to meet this man Willard? And she said, well, he's going to be at Fontana Dam, but he said, he surely won't leave me here. He said, well, he said, there's not much crime in Franklin right now. He said, I take my cruiser and we'll take you up to Fontana Dam. So this was Paula's story. So I kind of liked it to Barrie. Now, I told council, this was many, many years ago. I told council, now if this happens here, would you do the same? Would you be friendly? Franklin was known as a friendly place. And would you do things like that? Well, no, the hospital couldn't. The police couldn't, and we just could perhaps do a little bit more here in many cases to have not only Barrie be progressive, not only have it be the best and most beautiful city in Ontario, but also to be a friendly city.
Yeah, it's a lovely story. It would seem that the qualities of a good city would be humanity, compassion, cooperative, emergency workers, housing, affordable housing, food for people who need it. And it's probably a great definition of the sort of city that any of us would want to live in. So that's such a beautiful tale to tell it. Now, you've been promoting Barrie for over half a century. You're one of Barrie's biggest cheerleaders. And you spoke in December at the inauguration of the latest Barrie City Council. Your advice to them was have a vision, look to the future, plan for the future, make your mark on the city of Barrie. Recently, when you were filmed with Steve Paikin for the agenda at RVH, he issued you a challenge back to you and to himself and to Mayor Jeff Lehman as well. And he said, let's all get together in 45 years and see what Barrie looks like. So if you were looking ahead 45 years to an ideal Barrie, what do you think it would look like?
Well, I don't suppose you'll ever get ideal, but I see Barrie as very, very unique. I mean, being brought up in the Cambridge, Kitchener area, we would travel for an hour or more to get to water.
Yes.
here we have it right on our doorstep. What a valued asset. And at that particular meeting, they were all saying how Kempenfelt Bay is a hindrance in many ways. I don't see it as a hindrance at all. I see it as a great asset here. It's a beautiful, beautiful city to have built around. So there's many, we must progress looking not at everyday's. Sure, we have to deal with everyday's problems as they come up. And I think our council should look ahead more to what could take place. We could be a city of 200,000. We could be a city of 500,000 or more. And we should plan in many instances with that in mind as to what's the possible greatness that we can become.
That's a beautiful way to say it. What is the possible greatness that we could be? I think at this stage we will start to, thank you so much for that, Willard. I know there are people in the audience who would like to ask you some questions, and Robin and Bill have microphones. So we're going to ask if you could please catch the eye of Robin over here or Bill, and they could get the microphone to you so that we can hear your question for Willard down here, and ask, hopefully Willard will be able to answer it. Thank you.
Good evening, Willard. I've got a question for you. I came to Barrie in '76 and I joined the police department in '78, and the old timers told me that many, many years ago at the 5 Points, this is long before they had radios, there was a call box, but no one had any communication with the station, but there was a light at the 5 Points, and when they turned the light on, either red or red flashing, the officers on the beat downtown would know they had to call the station to see what was going on. Is that true?
When was this?
I don't know, but you may recognize some of the names. Frank Light?
Yes, Frank Light, I knew, yes.
Frank told me that story.
Yeah.
And he told me about the first police car that had no radio. I thought it was mayor, and you were probably on the police commission, you probably know some of these. You can't verify that for me, eh?
Well, I don't know that particular story of the light at the 5 Points, but it's very possible that that was true.
All right, thank you.
I know. By the way, Frank Light very well. I curled with him and against him.
Thank you.
Hi, Willard. We are two ladies who have joined you on some of your hikes. So first thing we want to say is thank you. Absolutely fantastic. But the second thing that I'd like to ask is, if you were going to go on one of those hikes this summer, which one would you choose?
Well, that's very difficult. We used to grade them as to some degree of difficulty in about three different grades. So a lot depends on that. There's no use going on a hike that's impossible to do. But there's great hikes. We have right here, we have the Bruce Trail to start on. And the Appalachian Trail that runs from Maine through to Georgia is just fabulous. And you meet people there left and right every year. There's close to 5,000 people start to do that trail as a through hike, and about probably 300 or 400 make it. And there's no charge, there's no nothing. You can go through places like I mentioned, Franklin, North Carolina. There's just tremendous experiences that can be had. Now you get into more difficult hikes. One of my most favorite ones is a Chilkoot Trail up in Alaska and the Yukon. It's difficult. You have to get permission from both the United States and Canada, but it's just a fabulous trip to do. And again, the Grand Canyon is just unspeakable in its grandeur. But again, there's difficulty there with permits and everything else. So the world is actually yours in trails. There's trails all through the United States, particularly in the West. And you can do sections of them, you can do a week, you can do many things, and there's all kinds of trail books and everything else where you can get information. So I don't know if I really haven't answered your question of what's the best one, and whether it's the first one or whether you're have done several.
Okay.
Willard, with all the travels that you've done in all the trips, was there any, and the people that you've come across, was there any one culture or group or tribe that had a profound effect on you and the group?
Yes, many countries have had a very distinct effect. First of all, the group we were with had a great effect. We'd have groups that really gelled together. We had some groups that did not. We had, again, in countries where we went, there were people that were friendly. There were people that were very aloof. They just didn't know us. But a lot is, even with aloof people, is just in really getting to know them and getting to know their character and whatnot, and you can make friends there. I'll give you one little example. In Peru, there I did 8 or 9 trips there in the Amazon, through the high Andes, and ending up in Machu Picchu. And we made friends there. We would go through a high route through the high Andes with a group of horsemen. We got to know all of them, and they were originally Quechua people. They weren't really the modern Peru people. They were not of Spanish descent. And again, they were very, very aloof. But it's funny how you made friends with them. And once you were a friend, and they were great friends. And I can remember on one occasion, we were just on a bus ride out of our starting place. And I had talked to the bus driver, I guess in a friendly way, and asked him where he lived and his family and so on and so forth. A year or two later, I'm walking down the main street, and it was a wide main street, and somebody shouting, "Willard, Willard, Willard!" And here it was this bus driver, you see, that I had been friendly to. So a lot goes on yourself. We always carried an identification. I got from our local member of parliament a supply of maple leaf pins that we were from Canada. And while we had many others go with us, many Americans go with us, it wouldn't be more than a few days in a foreign country and they would all ask for a pin if they wanted. And this endeared them to the people. One thing we always did was change to the currency of their country. We weren't giving them American dollars or anything else. We were dealing with their own country. So there's many places in many countries. Nepal is similar, where the people can be quite aloof, but we did make friends.
Hi, Willard. My name is Peter Burston. I've been living in Barrie for 26 years, and I was quite intrigued by how you said that you had to work hard and collect money and then spend it wisely to make the beautiful city we now have, and which I, by the way, have enjoyed very much. I was wondering now, after 10, 15 years, during which politicians have basically demonized the very word taxation and the very concept of public expenditure to build a great city, a great province, a great country, what would you do to reverse that?
Well, you're asking a tough question from somebody who was in politics a long time ago, and I'm not sure it would apply today. But I had one rule that I had learned as a boy in a family going through the Depression, that you never spent more than what you made. And this I applied to when I was mayor. I applied to the City of Barrie. And that's why we had the lowest tax rate, the lowest debt per capita, and all these other things. And yet we made many great improvements. How did we do it? And it was very simple. At budget time, I had a rule. I would hand out an edict to all spending bodies. This included library, cultural, Board of Works, the police, the fire, everybody would get a letter stating what they could bring in their budget at. And that was the assessment increase. And I can recall this one year, we had an assessment increase of 15.1%, a healthy increase. And everybody came in within that limit, except one, and that was the police. They came in with double, over 100% increase they wanted. The police had been to a convention and learned what other chiefs were doing to get great amounts and all of that. And so when I was presented with that in the mayor's chair, I tore it up and threw it out. It was the first time that we had COVID, and so it was televised, so it was big news. So at any rate, the police chief was Ed Shearhart, and I had hired him, and he came from Kitchener. And he was a good friend of mine, but for a time we weren't speaking. Anyway, I'm walking on Collier Street and I run into him. He's coming the other way. And I said, Ed, it's lunchtime and I'm going to have some lunch. And I said, I'm buying. And I said, if you don't want to say a word, don't say a word, but come and have lunch with me. So he did. And I said, Ed, you're the best policeman in the country. But as a businessman, you're not running it right. And I told him my own experience. I had a dairy, and you know how it is, a small business, and you're doing everything, including answering the phone. And finally, my secretary said, well, you can't be answering the phone every time it rings. You've got more important things to do. And I argued, but she wanted to. She hired a young girl just out of school, pleasant voice. She could deal with telephone calls better than I could. And anything important, sure, it was referred to me. But anyway, she dealt with many, many things and freed my time. So I said, Ed, here you have constables around the clock answering the telephone. That means at least 3 at a time. There's 3 shifts, that means 9. There's lunch breaks, there's dinner breaks, there's holidays with pay, there's time off. That means you got about 12 constables, 1/3 of your police force just answering the phone. And I said, you can hire a girl. We can't have women in the police force. Can't have them. So I said to him, how about retired people? maybe working 2-3 days a week. And I knew one that was his neighbor, in fact, and he knew that. And he said, I'll try that one. He tried it, and he came in, kept within his budget. We had less crime than we ever had, and everything was fine. But today, I don't know. We have some departments in our city that are running way ahead of what we're taking in. You can't do that in your home, or you couldn't pay the mortgage. You can't do that in a business, or you go bankrupt. And it just seems that the outlook in all of our governments, not just the city, but the province, the country as a whole, the United States, what have you, is they have another source, and that is two things: either raise taxes or go further into debt. And this is what they're doing, and that's just my theory.
Beth?
Mr. Kinzie, you have the unique perspective of having known many of the men and women who were mayor after you, people like Dorian Parker and Ross Archer and Janice Laking and Jim Perry. Out of the men and women that were mayor after you, who made the greatest impact on you, and how did they do it?
Well, I was friends with them all. I didn't agree with them all. However, they're elected by the people, and I think they've all tried to do in their ability the best they can. I have great regard for our present mayor. I think he's doing a wonderful job, and I wouldn't say an ill word against any one of them. I mean, I might disagree with them on some of the policies or things that they did, but I'd also look at the good things they did. Like, for instance, Dorian Parker created the great park up in Sunnydale Road, and I could go mayor after mayor and say this was created by such and such a mayor. So they all, I think, accomplish things for the people.
Hello, Willard. You know me. Over here. Willard, you and I have had the opportunity to have several conversations because I was working with you briefly on trying to capture some of your stories. And there's so many that I wish that you could share with this audience tonight because they're wonderful stories. But I think a wonderful one to perhaps end the evening on that really, to me, illustrates your character, your work ethic, your willingness to do whatever is necessary to get the job done, is your story of rescuing the cat. And I wonder if you would be willing to share that story.
Tell me that again, that last part.
Your story about rescuing the cat when you were mayor, the cat in the middle of the night on the hydro pole. I think it really illustrates your character and your work ethic. And I think it would be a lovely story to end off with.
Well, to start off with, at one time in my youth career in Waterloo Township, and Waterloo Township had a municipal telephone company that served places like Breslau, Blair, other places, and it was just a small telephone company. And a storm came along, and on the road going from Preston to Breslau, it wiped out all the poles came down. One pole came down, dragged the others down. So for a brief period, I had volunteered to help with that, and took off from the farm, and I learned how to put on spurs and climb a telephone pole and do this. So I knew how to climb a telephone pole. So anyway, what happened here in Barrie, this woman in the east end of Barrie, this cat had gone up a telephone pole and it was afraid to come down. And it would meow, and it would meow all night. She couldn't sleep. And so she had called the fire department. She had called the police department. She had called the mayor at the time. No, I was the mayor. She ended up calling me. And so I said, well, really that's a job for Barrie Hydro. We had our own hydro system at that time. But no, they weren't going to send somebody up to rescue a cat. So, I mean, I knew the manager, William Salter, very well, and I said, well, you send out a truck with a pair of spurs on, and I'll go up and get the cat. So he agreed to this. I went up, got the cat came just right into my arms, no problem. And we got the cat down. But the big problem came afterwards because the union complained.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, it's a fascinating experience this evening listening to your wide range of knowledge that you've gained over the years. The thing that stood out for me most was about Barrie becoming or potentially being a great city with a large population. You also mentioned 1 year political terms, you mentioned 4-year political terms. You mentioned Machu Picchu, an excellently planned citizenry. Where do you think Barrie, both as a citizenry and its leadership, where it's going in terms of becoming that great city? Where do we stand in terms of our planning, and how are we building to that greatness today?
Well, I think on the whole, they're doing very well. We've had our ups and downs. I think we've had terms of office of some people that have just been perhaps very good at looking after, let's say, fixing the potholes in the road, you know, the smaller problems, and not looking at the overall vision of growth. We've had others that have had great visions, and it's always a problem. You have to both sell the council on a particular type of thing. You have to get them with you, or a majority with you. You also have to sell the people. And I know when we went from a town to a city, it wasn't that easy. Council was not all agreed to it, because Barrie was a county seat, we would lose some business there, so on and so forth. And so we had to sell the people, and I took it to the people. And many things like this, you have to tell the people the story behind. We had to tell the story behind in business and industry was good for Barrie. All people were not agreed to that. Some people wanted to keep it a small little city. And the same thing with the waterfront. All people were not agreed. You got to remember one thing that I've observed in general, and this is being a Canadian, and I'm a great Canadian, but Canadians oftentimes would rather say no to something than yes to something. It just seems to be our nature. So we elect these people, and I've told them, when they've asked me to speak, I tell them what I think. They are the leaders, and they should also not only do their regular job, but they should also lead for Barrie.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Willard, it's just been an unbelievable privilege for me to be able to sit up here and ask you some questions this evening. You've modeled your advice to Barrie City Council. You've showed us all that the importance of having a vision, which you go back to again and again, it's so important, and how important it is to make an indelible mark on the city. What a legacy you have shown to this city. As your wife Ruth said, the former First Lady of Barrie put it, she said, "Rise to the challenge. This is ultimately the reason men build bridges, climb mountains, and do 1,000 other things that manifest personal achievement and satisfaction." You have always celebrated the importance of family as well as celebrating the importance of your city and your country. One of your grandchildren recently said, and he might be here, Neil, did Neil make it? Oh, he did. So I think I'm quoting you, Neil. Neil said that he was proud to be a Kinzie, and I must say that I'm deeply honored and proud to have interviewed a Kinzie. So thank you all for inspiring us to rise to the challenge. Would you please join me in thanking Willard?